dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. And I kind of want to just get started off on a lot of what's going on with China, their currency, and the U.S. dollar. And the top story on Drudge right now is more China moves spook stocks. It says here, this is out of Google, stock market quotes, news, currency, conversations, and more. Hong Kong, a year ago, executives of the Chinese e-commerce company Alibaba were preparing a roadshow that paved the way for one of the biggest initial public offerings of stock in history. In a bevy of blackballs, 96 million to be exact, a crucial solution in helping California manage its calamitous drought. On Monday, Los Angeles Mayor Eric, what is this all? Sorry. I think it's kind of throwing me in a rotation here. Okay, it's not going to work. That's why we don't go to Google for news. But there was another one out of Bloomberg. The death cross forms on Dow chart. The Dow Industrial average biggest decline in a month is proving the final nail in its death cross. That's what technical analysts call it when the 50-day moving average falls below the 200-day mean, a formation that was achieved today as the gauge declined for the 8th time in 9 days. The pattern is commonly interpreted as a signal price momentum and is frizzling out. If you don't make any upside progress, the moving average will start to flatten and eventually turn down. Now, this really still doesn't even go into how the bubble's been created on the stock market when, the stock market's doing good. That means the economy's doing good when you look around and the economy's not doing good. There's not as much unemployment out there anymore. No, it's people getting unemployment checks is not out there anymore. And then we've seen what came out of the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, which further shows that, well, it's not getting any better. I'm going to get into the Ron Paul Liberty Report. China devalues currency wars explode. And then Peter Schiff also came out, and I want to cover that too.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, nice to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. Good to be here.
Good. Big issue in the news today is China's devaluation of the yuan. It has caused a lot of excitement in the financial markets, the stock markets around the world, and it is a significant event. And I'd like to try to put that in a perspective because it's a continuation of currency wars. We've all heard about currency wars and competitive devaluations. But this one seems to be a little bit bigger and has gotten more attention. But I don't think it's a good sign. I think they're going in the wrong direction because our economies throughout the world are a mess. It isn't separate economies. Europe is connected with what we do in Asia. It's all connected because it's all built on a dollar standard, dollar reserve standard. It's a fiat dollar. And we would expect problems. We would expect inflation in that printing a lot of money causes distortions, and then you have downturns. And I think what we're in the middle of is a worldwide downturn, and people are starting to hurt. And all of a sudden, China, which has been doing fantastically, and has served as our banker, and they sell us a lot of good stuff at cheap prices, they have turned down. So they're not exporting as much to us. And instead of saying, well, why is that? Is there a problem with Keynesian economics, or is it a problem with the currency? So they conclude, as many, many others throughout history have concluded, well, if we just make our currency weaker, that will lower prices and people will keep buying stuff from us. And so they've devalued. But this is a common practice. But it never solves the problem. It might lower prices for a short period of time, but eventually the inflation in those economies come back up. So there's no long-term net benefit, but it's a policy done especially when you have fluctuating paper fiat currencies, and that, of course, is what we live with. But I want to put up a couple charts to show you and the audience, what we have done, because so often, like in foreign policy, we claim that we complain about others doing certain things, but we never do it, and we never look to, we may be doing exactly the same thing. Well, I think we're the big devaluators. We have devalued like crazy over the years. You take our Federal Reserve, they inherited a dollar that was $20 to an ounce of gold, 100 years ago. And now it's $1,100. So they've devalued 98%. So they've purposely devalued the dollar, and they continue to do it. But right now, it's popular to blame somebody else. So our politicians, there's a few in the presidential race, well, let's blame the Chinese, and maybe we just have to have a tough negotiator, and negotiator can ignore all these fundamental problems with currencies and interference with interest rates. But I'd like to put up a chart on where we were in 1971 before the breakdown of the Bretton Woods Agreement. And that was when, before in Bretton Woods, we honored the dollar at $35 an ounce. So it worked relatively well, although we constantly abused it by devaluing the dollar. It finally caught up, and it destroyed the pseudo gold standard, and it broke down. But then we immediately saw the market change. So we have the Japanese chart up here, Japanese yen, and in 1971, it took 360 yen to buy a dollar. And that meant the Japanese yen was very, very weak. But now on the lower part of that, it's down around 100. It's been under 100, which means the yen has gotten much stronger. So we were devaluating constantly. And if you measure our devaluation against the Swiss franc, we have a chart here on the Swiss franc. The Swiss franc was at one time valued over $4, for Swiss franc for a dollar. Now it's under $1. So there's been a tremendous devaluation according to the Swiss franc. So we don't have a right to lecture people about devaluations, but it is very popular. It's going to continue. But the big problem that we should think about are the international aspects of this, the politics of this, the economics, maybe a little complicated about this, but it certainly represents what happens if you don't have an anchor. And the anchor is a currency that can be universally accepted and a commodity which the politicians can't touch. And we don't have that. It's not going to happen, but we're setting the stage for a major change, and we just wonder now who it might be that will get some advantages after this breakdown.
Yeah, I was wondering, about the global political implications of this, and especially if, as they say, China, to get where it was last year, will need to do another 15% devaluation. So, and I wonder, because I remember when you were in the House and especially in the Foreign Affairs Committee, it was very popular to bash China for manipulation of its currency. They wanted to pass all sorts of bills attacking that. So there's a political implications of it too, and especially with the mood in Washington regarding China being seen as a great threat to the U.S. How do you see this sort of devolving downhill?
Well, I think China is in a better position than it appears. They're having a weakening economy. They inflated their currency because they had a lot of dollars. Instead of just allowing people to spend those dollars and spend them back here, what they did, they inflated by printing yuan, and the people who sold us goods had their money in yuan, but the dollars or the dollars we sent over there came back to us to prop up, our debt, which further perpetuated the problem. But the countries will inevitably want to, be protectionist, and my concern is that this devaluation, first, won't work. We did 10% and 8% in 1971. This is 2%, but it's still bad and going in the wrong direction. And I think what's going to happen is that these currency wars are going to get much worse. We're going to see price inflation. Then there will be a breakdown, and then there will be somebody's going to come along to restore confidence. And there's never been a time in history that they can restore confidence in the currency once they destroyed the confidence in the currency. Is they have to use some type of commodity to do so.
What do you think now? Who will pick up the pieces? Who are the winners and losers?
Well, I think we're going to be the losers because, we're the ones who are most out of balance, the biggest debt, biggest foreign debt, although we have been the biggest beneficiaries of this system because we had control of the fiat dollar. But when we lose that, I think it's going to shift over to China. And they're going to have allies with maybe Iran, India, Japan, and Russia. And maybe they can restore some confidence. And you say, that can't be. They're very weak right now. But I think we're destined to have a big problem. But, the biggest problem is we talk a lot about foreign policy and the antagonisms that go on. But the history shows that the more currency wars and competitive devaluations, because that's a form of a tariff, and the more protectionism that goes on, keep the goods out. And we did it in the 30s, they had this. What did it do in the 30s? It led to a bad war. So that is what I'm afraid might happen, is that it might help precipitate a major military conflict among the nations.
The Chinese are taking our jobs, that kind of mentality.
Yeah, they'll be continuing to do that. But I think the hardest thing for people to understand is that this whole economy appears to be half decent. It's an illusion. It's been built on a foundation of sand. Although it's sitting there and it looks okay, it's based on expectations that shouldn't have been there. That you can create real wealth by just a computer, and of course, wealth to some degree was preserved for the rich during this period of time. And by just printing like crazy. Our monetary expansion since the recession started, that's a devaluation. When you do QE, you're printing money like crazy, so you're devaluing the value of the currency, and it makes it so often look okay for the short run, but in the long run, we're just building up more anxiety and more problems. So I think this is a sign. I think this is a consequence that China right now economically is weaker than they want to admit, and people realize, and I think that's why most of the markets are reacting in a certain way, because all of a sudden if China wasn't buying enough stuff from us already, they're going to even buy less, but we're not going to buy from them either. So it's going to be compounding. But I really push it back to the fundamental fact that you can't have a sound economic system built on fiat money, and because it's distortion. It's inevitable that almost everything will have a mistake in it, although some people will benefit by it. But if you don't have the price of something, like if you don't have, the socialists don't have prices for commodities. That's why they never knew how many to produce or what the people wanted. So we've distorted the pricing structure in the financial markets between the currencies. Instead of having one currency that is agreed upon voluntarily and everybody agreeing that gold will be the backbone of the currency, we have all these competing currencies and leading to exactly what we have today. This shouldn't surprise anybody, and it shouldn't surprise anybody to see this get much worse. And that should be our concern, but it should inspire people to really look into the wisdom of having a currency that is not political, no political money. And, of course, I'd like to see more discussion in the presidential race on what people think about sound money. I had a struggle trying to get their attention last time to get them to talk about it, but the establishment love it. The military-industrial complex. Well, you can't do that. We're making money off this, and it's going to go on. The bankers like it. The politicians like it. Quite frankly, when the bankruptcy arrives, and then we will have to, change the system, or the system will change us, and that is what is coming. The Soviet system, fortunately, was not defeated militarily because we didn't have to. They defeated themselves from within, and that is what we're going to do if we don't look at this inwardly and find out, how did we participate in this fiasco? Is it all the Chinese fault? And I would say no, it's because of a complex monetary system, which is a political system, and it causes gross distortions on the value of the money, distortion on all the trades that are going on, and that will have to be unwound. And that is where the pain and the sufferings will come from, because you can't prop it up just by creating more credit, which has led us into this predicament. So once again, I vote for sound money, and I vote that we don't need central banking. And the sooner the American people wake up and find out we don't even need the Federal Reserve, the better off we'll all be. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Now, I think there's something that Ron Paul was missing there. And he gets into the fiat currency and China devaluing and, what we are. And he's correct when he says China will come out on the winning end. But he misses how much they will come out on the winning end. Because, again, he goes back to fiat currency. But something that's been going on for a while, I have stories here that are going back to a year to 2 years, 3 years ago, talking about China buying up gold, China buying up gold, China, Russia buying up gold, China, Russia buying up gold, hoarding gold, hoarding gold, hoarding gold. And I mean, this has been going back years, and it's just talking about, a lot of these are talking about maybe a long term, but then there's another good amount of them that are also talking about just, recent purchases. Here's like a large recent purchase, and here's another one. Then other ones are going, look at, this time period, and they've been buying up gold. And I mean, it's going back years. So when Ron Paul is talking about the devaluing of the yuan, however you pronounce it, but if you look at the devaluation, if they've been hoarding enough gold that then they can devalue their currency to match their holdings in gold, they just went back to the gold standard. And what that means for the U.S. dollar is this petrodollar, this world currency, it's over. They will have a power structure within their gold-backed currency that will outweigh any other country. Countries that have been trying to get their gold repatriated back to their country and have been unsuccessful. States here in the United States that have called for theirs haven't been successful. We'll see if Texas is successful, and they're talking about creating a state-ran bank. And, you know, things that Texas does is very independent. One of the only states to have its own power grid. They want their own banking. And people ask me what state would secede first. I think it's pretty obvious. Now, when you look at this, if they're going to back their currency with gold, they've already partnered with Russia, which has been devaluing. A lot of people say that it's been losing, but it's pretty useful if they can devalue their money to the point where it'll match their holdings in gold. And them teaming up with China and them creating this new banking system and courting European countries and South American countries. And I even seen another article talking about if the Iran deal doesn't go through, we'll lose the currency war. Well, that plays into the petrodollar. And it really, you can see multiple angles. But Peter Schiff also came out and said Chinese yuan devaluation as minor U.S. dollar bubble is growing. And I kind of got into this in a previous broadcast, but I'm going to go ahead and play this clip here. Okay, here's Peter Schiff.
Live from the NYMEX, this is Futures Now. I'm Courtney Reagan in for Jackie DeAngelis. The traders that are joining me today, Brian Sutland and Jeff Kilberg, they are both from the CME, but let's get right to the big story of the day, and that is China's surprise move to devalue its currency. What does it all mean for us here in the U.S. and the ripple effects that are being felt around the world? Joining us to discuss that and more is Peter Schiff. He is the CEO of Euro Pacific Capital. Peter, thanks so much for joining us today. I guess my first question really is, why isn't gold moving more on the news out of China?
Well, you know, it's moving up a lot in terms of the Chinese yuan, right? Because they devalue the yuan, and gold is up in terms of the dollar today, so it's up even more in terms of the yuan. But the reason it's not making a bigger dollar move is because China's devaluation is also impacting other currencies, particularly commodity-linked currencies. Look at the Australian dollar, look at the Canadian dollar. Gold is making a huge move in those currencies as well. But, you know, I don't think this is the beginning of future devaluations. This is a small move. Remember, the Chinese yuan has gained tremendously in value along with the dollar against a number of currencies. So the Chinese are reacting to weakness in other currencies. It's not really a dollar story, but I do believe the dollar is in a bubble. And when this bubble bursts, I think you're going to see a substantial revaluation upward of the yuan against the U.S. dollar, ultimately.
So there's still a lot of movement potentially that's left to happen here. And of course, every time something big happens that moves markets, whether it's equities, whether it's commodities, we all wonder, what does it mean for the Fed? So, Peter, in your opinion, what does China's latest move really mean for what the Fed will or won't do and when?
I don't think it matters at all. Again, I've been saying that I think the Fed has been bluffing about its ability to raise interest rates all along. I think the Fed appreciates that this is a gigantic bubble, and any significant rate hike would prick it. In fact, even a quarter of a point rate hike might be a big enough pin to prick this bubble, which is why all the Fed does is talk about raising rates and doesn't actually raise them. And in fact, I think if they do raise rates slightly, whether it's in September or December, the next move after that is going to be to move them back down to zero in preparation for QE4, because this economy will be in recession if the Fed raises rates, and it will be in recession even if they don't raise rates.
Wow, that's quite a big prediction. What do you think about the global currency wars? How will that end? What did today's action do to shake up predictions there?
Well, unfortunately, I think America is going to win the currency war, right? Which means Americans are going to lose. It's a race to the bottom. So that's the one war that you don't want to win, because the objective is to kill yourself. But I think we're going to win. But right now, you have a dollar bubble. I mentioned this. You have all these currency speculators that have been fooled by the Fed's monetary magic. They bought into the same head fake that they did in the late 1990s, where they believed the Fed, they had confidence in its monetary policy and the U.S. economy, and so they bid up the dollar. Everybody expects the Fed to be beginning a tightening cycle. They're going to start to shrink their balance sheet. None of this is going to happen. They're getting ready to do QE4. The balance sheet, which is now, $4.5 trillion, is going to explode, ultimately closer to $10 trillion. I think the currency speculators are betting the wrong way. And so when they figure it out, I think the bottom is going to drop out of the dollar. And, we're going to win. I think everybody else is going to surrender in the currency wars and let us win.
Big, bold predictions from Peter, as always. Jeff, I believe you have a question. Go ahead and jump on in there.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for being on. And I know your view of QE4 is finally being illuminated. It's been met with some resistance in the past. But, Peter, I think you're onto something with this QE4. The Fed may have to step in. But what is that exact lever that needs to be pulled? Is it a 5-10% drop in the equity market, or is it more central banks overseas getting in to make the Fed roll out QE4?
Well, part of the goal of QE was to inflate the stock market bubble. Ben Bernanke admitted that himself. And so if the air comes out of the bubble because they threaten to prick it, then yes, they're going to have to do QE4 to blow it back up again. If the Fed were to raise rates, we would be in a bear market in stocks. We'd be in a bear market in real estate. We'd have another financial crisis. Unfortunately, that's what the Fed should do. The Fed should have raised rates a long time ago. They should have pricked this bubble. We need that type of bitter-tasting medicine to actually have a real recovery, instead of the phony recovery we have now that is impoverishing people instead of lifting them out of poverty. But the Fed is going to make the same mistake again. They are not going to allow the free market to fix what they broke. They are going to do QE4. They're going to do QE5. They're going to do QEs indefinitely until a currency crisis ends the party, and then they can't do it anymore. And that crisis is going to come.
Peter, before we get to potentially a QE4 or QE5, I want to kind of button up the segment here, talking about what China's move means for equities. We're sitting at session lows here today. What does it mean today going into the end of the week for equities?
Well, look, I don't think China's move is what's impacted the U.S. stock market. We had been down, 7 days in a row before yesterday. That was the biggest losing streak in 4 years. I think the Fed is threatening to take away the punch bowl, and people actually believe them. I think they're getting ready to spike it again. But I think the markets is going to be under pressure until the Fed cries uncle, until Janet Yellen comes out and acknowledges that the economy is much weaker than they're pretending, and that they're not going to be raising rates, that they're going to be doing more monetary stimulus. That is what the drug addicts on Wall Street want. They want another fix, and I think the pushers at the Fed are going to provide it, unfortunately.
We'll see if the pushers at the Fed, your words, not mine.
Okay. So that was Peter Schiff on. Now, I don't know. I still think that they will raise interest. And I don't think they can hold it off anymore, but we'll see. Um, it's one of those things, they keep you waiting, and people have been looking at this for a while, and that's why I think they can't keep the interest rates down. They will, I believe, they'll have to raise interest rates here, but no matter if they do it now or if they hold off, if they hold off, um, you're going to have probably even a worse bubble created, and eventually it's got to end. And that's something that, me and him agree on. It's got to end eventually. It can't go on forever. And I think that if you look at the bigger picture, no matter what China is doing, it's really what are we doing, and we are into this whole fiat money, and the monetary policy is just screwed all to hell. And really, it's always affecting the middle class and the people in poverty. Because when you devalue the dollar in the pocket of people that have so much money, they don't know what to do with it. They really don't care. They just put it towards groups that do their bidding, and they still have money coming out the wazoo. You're not going to ever have that devaluation affect those type of people, and then they will move their currency around because they're multinationalists. They are not loyal to any community because they have no exclusive community. They'll give a community gifts just to keep them happy, where their mansion that takes up 2/3 of the area doesn't bother the locals. I know there's castles of the Rothschilds that you can tour, and it's dumb crap like that. They got money out. They're not loyal. Which you don't really want to seek loyalty, but what you do want to seek is freedom. People that play country upon country and jump around are basically robbing from everyone. And you can find a lot of these people around a lot of the central banks that work on this fiat and Keynesian economics, and you see what happens. And it goes back to, a lot of the globalist ideals. And it's about controlling the populace, and they believe that they are better than the next person, that they are of intelligence, that they should be able to have the less intelligent people be their hands, do their biddings. And you can see it in a lot of their documents, and they don't think, oh, well, we're just, we send you off to wars that make us rich, but you know what? We're helping you, because otherwise, who would you be? What would you be? People that go off and fight for us, they're patriotic. They do it for the freedom of their country. By the way, you will be giving up all your rights when you join, and you will be treated like a slave, because basically that is what you're signing up for. When you come back, we will tell you that your mental capacity is not all there, therefore you can't own guns. We will give you crappy health care and try to force you into assisted living or when you get older into nursing homes. You know, things like this are things that we see. And, you know, you see these people, why my grandpa wasn't, my great grandpa, my great great grandpa, my dad, my aunt, my uncle, we're all in the military, so I want to be like them. But we really have no grasp beyond that in a lot of instances. And I luckily, when I was young, I did kind of think these things through. You know, what are we fighting for? What are we fighting against? How do we fight against that? Do they have a strategy? Doesn't look like their strategy is working too well. It's one of those things that we need to think about things like that, because we become pawns in this scheme that is robbing us and then having us go off to fight other people that are being sent off to fight for these rich people to fight over control over the populace. Okay, I know I had a couple callers trying to call in. If you can hold off until the second hour, I will be taking phone calls later on. But I did want to move on here. Okay. Now I got the next one, and this is Christopher Green on the Chinese yuan devaluation, and he is calling it an act of war. Now, an act of war, I think, is a extreme outlook on it. But if people are playing their cards right, remember we might not have as much knowledge as some of these government spy agencies might have about what's going on. They might be seeing things that we aren't. We know government keeps a lot of secrets, act like they can't, act like they're dumb, but really they're playing a very intelligent and manipulative game on society. Don't think these politicians are as dumb as they think they are. And if they are, why are they there? If not, they're playing a game on you to go, look, they're too dumb to do anything, really. But look at where our freedoms have gone. These aren't dumb people. They play dumb. But Christopher Green, Chinese yuan devaluation is an act of war. And there might be some explicit language, so keep the youngsters maybe away.
Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're tuning in to AMTV Alternative Media Television. It's Wednesday, August 12, 2015, and this Chinese yuan renminbi devaluation is an act of war, the currency war. This intentional depreciation of the yuan to the dollar is basically inciting, as Peter Schiff had coined it, a race to the bottom.
Well, unfortunately, I think America is going to win the currency war, right? Which means Americans are going to lose. It's a race to the bottom. So that's the one war that you don't want to win, because the objective is to kill yourself. But I think we're going to win. But right now, you have a dollar bubble. I mentioned this. You have all these currency speculators that have been fooled by the Fed's monetary magic. They bought into the same head fake that they did in the late 1990s, where they believed the Fed, they had confidence in its monetary policy and the U.S. economy, and so they bid up the dollar. Everybody expects the Fed to be beginning a tightening, $4.5 trillion.
China, there's a reason why they did this. Not only are they trying to debase to artificially support their falling, collapsing stock market, which had doubled over the last 12 months and has been falling like a knife in recent weeks, but also because they want to free float their currency to the dollar in relationship to other currencies, so it's more market-oriented, so that potentially they can become a part of the SDR basket, the special drawing rights that makes up the IMF, that makes up the majority position as the world reserve currency.
But Christopher, I thought the world reserve currency was a conspiracy theory.
Well, nope. You see, the IMF basket makes up a special drawing rights, an SDR, of principal currencies around the world, which the U.S. dollar has had the majority stake for some time and has since enjoyed. That status is all changing. It's one of the reasons why Mr. Kerry and Obama have been negotiating with Iran on this Iran nuclear deal. It has nothing to do with lifting sanctions to promote Iran getting the bomb or anything like that. It's because the East is gaining ground against the United States.
Are you kidding me? The United States is going to start sanctioning our allies and their banks and their businesses because we walked away from a deal, and we're going to force them to do what we want them to do, even though they agreed to the deal we came to? Are you kidding? That is a recipe quickly, my friends, for them to walk away from Ukraine, where they are already very dicey and ready to say, well, we've done our bit. They were ready, in many cases, to say, well, we're the ones paying the price for your sanctions. It was Obama who went out and actually put together a sanctions regime that had an impact. I went to China. We persuaded China, don't buy more oil. We persuaded India and other countries to step back. Can you imagine trying to sanction them after persuading them to put in place sanctions to bring Iran to the negotiating table? And when they have not only come to the table, but they made a deal, we turn around and nix the deal and then tell them you're going to have to obey our rules on the sanctions anyway. That is a recipe very quickly, my friends, business people here, for the American dollar to cease to be the reserve currency of the world, which is already bubbling out there.
The East is superseding the West. The West is being flushed down the toilet due to our own policies, our own political correctness, the shenanigans at the Federal Reserve, and the Wall Street whores that are itching for QE4. You know, we've talked about this for some time over this past several years, throughout, and post the 2008-2009 collapse. Not only is the Federal Reserve not going to raise rates meaningfully, again, I can say that I started a new workout program, but if this is all I'm doing, finger push-ups like this isn't a workout. A workout is actually doing squats, bench press, pull-ups, etc., dips. That's a workout. This isn't a workout. So when the Federal Reserve raises 50 bips or 25 bips or 75 bips, that's not raising interest rates meaningfully. Instead of really raising interest rates and normalizing policy, as Ben Bernanke has said behind closed doors will never do in his lifetime, instead of that, what they're actually going to do is initiate QE4, quantitative easing 4. Now, they might call it something different. They'll have some new name for it or new acronym. But that is what is more than likely going to happen. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if the Federal Reserve was in cahoots with China to devalue the Chinese yuan, so they had an excuse not to raise rates. See, now they can say it's a demand-side issue, that demand is weakening with the GDP growth, they say, in China now 7%, used to be double digits, and everything weakening on demand side. So we're seeing this royal financial markets. The S&P 500 has dipped below the 200-day moving average. The 50-day has dipped below the 200-day, otherwise known as a death cross, which could mean that we're starting to move even more aggressively into correction territory. Of course, we've had a dramatic sell-off in commodities recently, and we still have all these pundits that couldn't predict oil collapsing from $150 a barrel, now settling around 50, are now saying it's going to zero. Yeah, the same guys that had no idea commodities were going to crash in the first place are now saying that commodities and oil specifically is going to go to like 30 or maybe even potentially 20. Now, you see, that's just ridiculous. The time to short oil was at 150, not 50. Now, could oil go to 30? Yeah, of course. It's a market. Could it go to 20? Yeah, of course. It's a market, but it'd be grossly overshooting and would be yo-yoing, in my opinion, aggressively back to a more normalized direction. Oil should be trading at $65, $75 a barrel. We still use oil. We still need oil. I don't care about the shale revolution, all this new technology, et cetera, et cetera. And also what I've noted is just the strength. Have you noticed the strength even amongst the drillers in recent days? Even with oil supposedly tanking and collapsing and these problems in China, a lot of these names are up. You see, there's a sector rotation out from big tech. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. The trade used to be long big tech, short commodities. Long big tech, short oil. Now it's reversing. Notice we're seeing strength on the oil side, in the commodity side, in gold, in silver, in real tangible goods, items, etc. And we're seeing tech sell off. We've seen Apple, a market leader, moving into correction territory. I think that this trend has really just begun. I think the traders are just reversing the trade now. They're probably short the NASDAQ. They're short these big tech names. We saw Alibaba, down 7%. I know people hate when I do that. Alibaba. So I just continue to do it because you hate it. Because people just hate when I do that. Alibaba was down 7% in after-hours trading based on its earnings report release. So it's amazing. Some of these drillers, too, are actually posting really good numbers. Companies like Transocean, the Swiss driller, had an awesome earnings report a couple of days ago. Just awesome. Stellar. Blew it out of the water. Turns out they're not going out of business. Turns out that we still need oil. So again, that's one of the major trends and shifts that I see. But this devaluation of the Chinese yuan, otherwise known as the renminbi, the reason for it is because, again, China, with their establishment of the AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the counterpoint and competitor to the World Bank, and the Western-driven IMF, this is all about initiating the Chinese yuan and the renminbi as the world reserve currency. So the U.S. is going to lose that superpower status. I mean, Trump is right when he says America is a loser. We don't win anything. We don't win against Mexico. We don't win against China. We don't win against the Middle East. It's these countries that are beating the shit out of us. It's why Iran and Russia are running war games right now in the Middle East. This is all about the establishment and the strengthening of the East against the West. The West is losing. The East is winning. And so it's really the same theme, the same exact theme we talked about 5 years ago. We talked about throughout and during the 2008-2009 financial crisis. This is a rush to the bottom, a rush to debase the currency. All the traders, Wall Street, that has currently been bidding up over the past few months, the dollar, that see this dollar strengthening, I think are being sold a lie, a head fake, total bullshit. I think it will reverse in the not-too-distant future. I agree with pundits like Peter Schiff, who were right on target, predicting the collapse of the 2007 housing market and the collapse in credit. None of this is difficult to see if you just open up your eyes. So I expect these trends to continue. Again, there's much more to do with this Chinese devaluation of their currency. This isn't just a market move to stabilize their market. This is all about superseding the United States as the world's superpower, becoming and dominating that world reserve currency, becoming the world reserve currency so the IMF will include it in its SDR basket, or it'll just simply move into its own basket with its creation of its own competitor banks in the name of the AIIB. This, of course, all leads to war. It leads to the debasing of the dollar until there is a currency shock and a currency crisis of a very serious magnitude here in the United States, which will upset, roil our financial system. At that point, all assets outside of, I believe, real tangible things like gold and silver will sell off dramatically. There will be 100% correlation, just like there were in 2008 and 2009. The system will collapse once again. Of course, it won't be the Federal Reserve's fault. It won't be the politicians' fault. It won't be the bankers' fault. They'll blame it on war. War, perhaps, will probably be the reset button. And it continues ad nauseum. It's exactly why we need a change here in America. It's why we need to make America great again. It's why we need people like Donald Trump, although he's egotistical and narcissistic and he's kind of an asshole. He is a business person. He is an outsider to the GOP. Yes, he's a business elitist, but he's not a part of the political establishment. That's a good thing. We need some change. We need to start winning again and stop losing. And that's been the case over much of my lifetime, actually, especially in recent years. And I'd like to change that. I'm Christopher Green. I'd love to hear what you think. Put your comment or question in the description box below. Tell me where you think the markets are headed, what you think about commodities, oil prices at these levels, what you think about gold and silver. Get this video out everywhere, make it viral, hard-hitting it in your face, and click the link below to support our sponsor.
Now, I completely disagree with him on the Donald Trump thing. I've talked about Donald Trump, and I'll kind of get into that here next. But when it comes to commodities like gold and oil, we've been talking about this for a while. And I think that you have an instance where Saudi Arabia is probably not going to lower their prices anymore. They like putting a shock to the U.S. economy, but they also like making money. And I think they thought they would do a little bit more damage. I think they didn't go down quick enough. They didn't plunge it. But what we're seeing is a little uptick on the oil side, but another uptick on the gold and silver side. And I went over the article about the paper asset of gold being dumped on the market, basically not tangible gold. It was a manipulation again in the market. Again, we know who's holding a lot of physical gold, and it's not us. We seen gold and silver go down. People are like, I told you, that whole roller coaster or that whole bandwagon thing about gold. That was just the thing. I said, they're like, you don't see these We Buy Gold anymore. I said, no, they closed up shop and they got out of town with people's gold. It's not like all of a sudden, they had a whole bunch of gold and went bankrupt. Probably not. They pay underpriced. They got their gold, sold it, and guess what? They kept a lot of it. They did. Gold market is dropping, and people were freaking out. But now we're seeing it going back up. Well, it all plays in the manipulation of the market. And talking about manipulation, kind of let's go into this Donald Trump thing. Excuse me. Okay. I went over an article about Donald Trump and his ideology and how it really resembles national fascism type attitude. Well, I have an article here from Jeffrey Tucker. Why we should talk about fascism. And he put this out at July 19th. I want to go over this real quick. Last week I wrote an article that I'm pretty sure received the highest circulation I've ever had on a single piece of writing. It It was an interesting experience. The first version appeared on Liberty.me probably 4 days later. I revised it, restylized it, and it appeared on FEE.org. Then Newsweek picked it up, then Zero Hedge, and it went viral from there. My social was slammed. I can't keep up with the interview requests. It's a bizarre thing because I write every day. Why this one? Why now? I have no idea, no theory. I try to put valuable stuff in everything I write, so I don't regard this article's popularity as a commentary on its quality. It's just somehow hit in the right way at the right time. You can't game this system. It amuses me when people accuse me of having written something to go viral. If it were that easy, I would do it more often. But I did learn something from this experience. I learned that we desperately need a theory of right-wing statism. We know what socialism is. We think of it as left-wing, but the culturally right-wing version has no real name. We talk about specific variants of right-wing theories such as theocrats, gignostics, racialists, and so on, but it's rather haphazard. These describe odd biases and impulses, but not a political theory. So when someone like Donald Trump comes along, we have no real term to describe his views. We listen to him scream about making the nation into a business, about the evil of foreigners, about the danger of bad trade deals, about the need for a new order of things that bypasses the sluggish and cowardice of the status quo. We listen, but it all sounds like the random yammerings of a crank. When I heard his speech, it gradually dawned on me that I had heard all these views before. They are rather new in modern history, or rather they have never covered in the way before the interwar period. But they did indeed come to cohere, push mostly as an alternative to socialism. This alternative to socialism was not freedom as such. It was another version of the planned society, but without the completely idiotic theories pushed by socialist lunatics for the last 500 years. In a brief period in the 1930s, it developed the right name. It came out of a syndicalist theory and eventually led to Nazism, and then was blown away in wartime. But between 1930 and 1938, it had a name, and it was briefly respectable and gained a gigantic following. In fact, it was far more popular all over the developed world than socialism ever was. Its name was fascism. What were its tenets? Like socialism, it sought a planned society ruled by smart people with power and resources. But unlike socialism, it had no interest in strange and far-flung theories about overthrowing human nature, creating a new man, abolishing religion, or getting rid of the family or private property. Indeed, it praised all these institutions. It only clarified that these institutions needed to serve the national interests and the collective heart of the people. It draws on revolutionary idealism to some extent. It says that the current system is deeply corrupt. It serves special interests only. It's riddled with graft, bribes, and payoffs. It calls for a new plan that sweeps away the existing order and replaces it with a plan that serves a higher ideal. That ideal can be anything: race, history, people, industry, whatever. Doesn't matter. What matters is the power that is necessary to make the system smarter, more productive, more mighty, and glorious. Fascism then would not propose the abolition of private property, or even the nationalization of the industry. Sorry. I'm trying not to sneeze. It would not propose to suppress religion or family. It proposes regulatory controls on all these sectors of life in order to channel them into a single national interest. This requires a massive and totalitarian state, one that effectively obliterates any room for individual decision-making, institutional autonomy, freedom of action, entrepreneurship, and so on. It is conventionally believed that fascism does not have a fully worked out plan for managing national life, and that's true enough, but actually its plans are more worked out in practice than socialism ever was. The socialists were famed for their blistering criticism of capitalism, but rather short when it came to actually showing how their harebrained system of collective ownership of scarce goods would work out in practice. In contrast, the fascists were much more overt about their plans for economic life. Business would be cartelized, labor would be syndicalized, trade would be mercantilized, and production and consumption subjected to massively regulatory oversight in the name of the national interest. No, I do not believe that Trump has done a private study of the works of the Italian syndicates in order to arrive at his views. Fascism took hold in history not because it is a systemized theory of politics. It took hold because it cobbles together a series of cultural bias together with a belief that the state is the best possible tool for organizing economic and social life. Anyone who can combine those two can find themselves stumbling, however, haphazardly into embracing fascist theory. But just as with socialism, fascism is also a method for propagandizing people into considering a new way of ordering society. The fascist must get elected, he must convince people to acquiesce to his dictatorial aspirations. Here is where the failures of the current system serve him well. The entire establishment is deeply corrupt, incredibly stupid, not serving the nation, failing to boost the national spirit, and so on. The orator seeks to tap into raw emotion in hopes of inspiring a suspension of incredulity. Fascism is also deeply personal, more so than socialism. It is all about the great leader's capacity to wrest control of an entire economy and nation and steer it in the right direction. Thus, does business or military success become central to the campaign? Well, that kind of plays into the war hawk nature that Trump has. So you can read the rest of that at tucker.liberty.me. It's titled Why We Should Talk About Fascism. Okay. Second here. I'm going to play another Ron Paul Liberty report. And this one is ISIS winning? Question. Will Trump's plan work? And you know, when you look at the fascist type rhetoric that came out in the 30s, you know, everybody was the enemy, and you go in and crush them. a lot of people say, we're not there to conquer, but what happens is we do it. You see fascists conquer because they believe that, well, we need to keep pushing because otherwise they'll just come back. And we see that coming out of these wars. ISIS came out of Al-Qaeda, and it's because we pulled back. It's not because we went in, it's because we pulled back. And that's fascist rhetoric. So when we go into these wars, we're not going to see nation building anymore until we push way beyond that. And now it becomes territory. This is really a reversal of where we believe we should have come, really. But it's because we have socialists and fascists arguing over who should have control over what. And that's something that I've been saying on air for a long time. Which foot do you want kicking you in the butt? The left one or the right one? But here's another Ron Paul Liberty report. ISIS winning. Will Trump's plan work?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Daniel McAdams is with me this morning. Good to see you, Daniel.
Good Monday morning, Dr. Paul.
Very good. Guess what? I want to talk about foreign policy.
That's a shock.
Very important issue. Not that the economic policies aren't very important, because I think there's something big is brewing there as well. But I want to follow up on, the most famous politician of the moment, and that is Mr. Trump. And he knows something about finances, but I'm just wondering how much he knows about foreign policy, because the question is whether or not ISIS is winning, and obviously he says it is, and he has a plan. But as usual, it's not, a modest plan. It's very simple. Go get them, invade them, send in the troops, ground troops, whatever. And that's going to solve the problem. But I think the question, though, is legitimate. Is ISIS winning? And it depends on what you describe as winning. They seem to be winning some battles. We don't seem to be winning much when it comes to watching our finances or enhancing our safety and our security. We might be able to win a military fight here and there, but really, who's winning and who's losing? So there are other ways to think about this other than just marching in. And recently, Michael Schur wrote a sort of an article about this and describing some of the problems quite a bit different than the approach that Donald Trump has.
Indeed, and we put this up on the Institute's website this morning. Mike Scheuer, who's on the board of our Institute, he pointed out that this law and order approach doesn't work and hasn't worked. And we know the U.S. intelligence has said after a year of bombing, they've really made no headway against ISIS. They've made no real significant gains, despite what's being said. And Mike Scheuer points out that really it is the U.S. interventionist policies, the bombings themselves, the drone attacks themselves, which are strengthening ISIS. And in fact, the U.S. building a coalition of moderate Arab states, I don't know if you'd call Saudi Arabia moderate, but building this anti-ISIS coalition actually will have the opposite effect and will encourage them and be a great recruiting tool for them.
And unite the Sunni groups. And already I think that's been said, that there's one thing that unifies all the groups in Syria, and that is get rid of the foreigners. And therefore, and he's arguing this case. But he also complains that we're taking it country by country and don't have a unified policy. And he says it's a mistake for the United States government, and we hear it all the time. This is a long war. Be prepared. And I think that might be psychological conditioning for the American people to be prepared for an authoritarian government. But he says that's a serious mistake because maybe, just maybe, ISIS is moving a lot quicker.
Well, there's the danger of someone like Donald Trump, who's a sort of he's a populist demagogue. He doesn't operate with an ideological or philosophical perspectives guiding him. Unfortunately, he adopts the neocon view that we need troops, but there's no real guiding force, so he doesn't really have a guiding principle. It's just sort of the off the cuff. And it's ironic on something like ISIS, where his plan would make things worse, as Mike Scheuer and people who know a lot more about it would say. In some areas, for example, we talked about it earlier with Crimea, he said, hey, that's Europe's problem. It's not our problem.
Yeah, and let's just refresh our memories on Scheuer. He isn't somebody that's just a journalist speaking out with a little bit of experience, but how many years was he in the CIA, and somebody who's very knowledgeable about this area?
Well, he was head of the unit that was going after bin Laden, so he probably knows more than anyone. In fact, he wrote a book about bin Laden. So
yeah, that is for sure. But he claims that they've made some beachheads in various countries, and he mentions the Balkans, Libya, as well as Afghanistan, but I'd probably add Iraq in there, too. There's beachheads for Al-Qaeda / ISIS, so it just seems like they're much further ahead ever since we've been in there, and we go into these countries that are not even there. By the time we leave, they have a presence there.
We talked about this before. The Balkans is very interesting. You know, as I mentioned, I spent a lot of time overseas. I lived there for quite a number of years, and I used to go to Albania very often in work I was doing with the human rights group while there was unrest. And I was shocked because the Albanians are not religious people at all. They've not been for a number of reasons. But all of a sudden, around 97 or 98, every time I flew into Tirana, I would see a shiny new mosque in the countryside. And I asked one of my Albanian partners about it, and he said, well, those are all being built by Saudi Arabia, and they were unhappy. They're madrasas, and they didn't like it because it was stirring things up.
Well, you know, and Michael makes another point that shouldn't be ignored if we're going to be continuing this fight rather than coming up with a sensible foreign policy. He mentions about the strategic naval passageways like the southern part of the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, and the Straits of Malacca in Malaysia. So these are areas, if he said they have a presence there and they can do something and maybe close these down. So strategically, they may have bigger plans. But I still think it goes back to where does the motivation come from? And certainly our foreign policy has been a strong motivation. But I'm afraid the Trump approach could become very popular with a lot of Republicans, although the Republicans are cautious. But he was claiming that, we got to go in. ISIS have killed Christians, which is absolutely true. What you can't say, except on a program like this, but you couldn't say this on TV because they say, well, yes, that is true, and they're evil and they're monsters. That's why we should never do anything to help them. Of course, we had a program pointing out how we helped ISIS get started, and they still have a lot of our weapons. But they have killed Christians. But that's more likely to happen after we get involved. Countries live with, Muslims have lived with Christians and Jews and Muslims when outsiders are not in there. And all of a sudden when the outsiders are there, and I was just thinking about there's no way the numbers could be, we could grab hold of the numbers, but there's a lot. Think of back from 1991 with the Persian Gulf War. And remember, I think it was Bush one of those times. This is going to be a crusade, which is a reminder of the West Christian nations going in and interfering. But I wonder how many Muslims have been killed in the last 15, 20 years. It has to be a whole lot. So yes, it's all tragic, but I just wish people would think more about what is the precipitating event that causes this, and I think we're a long way from coming up with an answer for that.
Well, whoever thought up the idea of beheadings and putting them on videos was a brilliant media person because the effect is so startling. Everyone is shocked and startled, but you're no less dead when you're an innocent family hit by a drone. You know, the effects are the same. But you touched on something earlier about U.S. Americans getting behind this idea of just go in. And there is a real sense of frustration. There's a lack of understanding about the Arab and Muslim world, and people aren't that interested in looking into it. And I think there's a tendency then to support throwing up our arms and going all in. You know, I noticed something on the debate. I haven't asked you about this before, but it really struck me. Is Ted Cruz was up there, and he said something like, we need a field marshal like Sisi to guide us. And this is he's an absolute military dictator of Egypt. he's assassinated thousands and thousands of his own people, and repressing all political thought in the country, and to embrace someone like that is shocking.
Well, and a real problem there, because I've been on the receiving end of it. When you make a suggestion and try to bring common sense to it, that means you're not supporting the troops, you're not American, you're un-American and weak. At the same time, it's because they ignore out of their willingness to just march on, their willingness to avoid even thinking about how wars are supposed to be started, with the consent of the people and the Congress voting on it. So they just continue to do this. But there was another thing in the news today that I think shows that things are accelerating over there, and that has to do with, of course, the issue we've talked about a lot, and that is what's going on in Turkey. And a couple of weeks ago it was announced the U.S. and Turkey would, start bombing ISIS and the Kurds. And now today, evidently there is a reaction to that action. And there were 4 significant violent episodes in Turkey. And I keep thinking, get your opinion on this. I keep thinking, Turkey has their region. They're strong. They're independent, part of NATO. They don't like Assad. But how far would they have gone with this bombing if we weren't there to encourage them? They might have been a little bit more conservative, but, they see this as a chance. We don't like Assad. Now the Americans don't like Assad, and the other Arab nations, Israel doesn't like Assad. So this is the time to do it. It seems like what we do seems to expand the violence with no end in sight. That's what bothers me.
And without getting into conspiracy thinking, it does make you wonder. There are so many stories about the alleged shipment of weapons from places like Benghazi in Libya, where there were so many weapons floating around after our liberation. These being shipped to fighters in Syria via Turkey and Jordan. How much truth is there to that? And maybe what were the Turks promised by the U.S. in exchange for turning a blind eye?
Well, maybe when they interview Hillary on a debate, if there's a debate, maybe she'll explain that to me. Maybe she has some information, about this, but who knows? The American people certainly deserve it. And this is the other thing that bothers me about Trump, because we want information. So if he has all these answers, wouldn't it be good to have the correct information? But what does he do with the guy that finally gives us information? He calls him a traitor. Of course, I'm talking about Edward Snowden. So that's hardly the way to go. I don't believe that there's anything that indicates that Donald Trump wouldn't use executive orders for various domestic things, but for military things too. If Bush did it and Obama does it, and they ignore what the Congress does, I would think that Donald Trump would be quite willing to use this authoritarian approach. And he really would have made Bill Kristol very happy with the statement he made today about just, boots on the ground and let's go in there and kill them, this sort of thing.
Well, Scheuer provides the real answer, the real solution to the problem. If I can read just his last sentence, because it could have been written by someone I know. It's time to put America first and return to General Washington's foreign policy legacy by immediately proclaiming the end of U.S. interventionism, the termination of support for all states and groups in the Middle East, U.S. withdrawal from NATO, and resumption of America's most effective national security policy, strict neutrality.
That does sound a little bit familiar. It sounds like I can agree with that. And I think a lot of Americans agree with that, because when I talked this language in the campaign, we got a lot of support. But, the war propagandists are run by the media, by the military-industrial complex, and by just about anybody that gets into the higher echelons of government. And they are the warmongers it's very hard to contend with. But most Americans realize that we'd be better off not doing this, but they can be talked into it because of the old technique. If you don't go along with it, you're un-American, you're weak, and you're unpatriotic. And that has to change. And unfortunately, though, the way we're going now, it's going to stay the same. I think it'll end, though. Unfortunately, it's going to end with a major bankruptcy. That's why the economic conditions are very vital. The Chinese are buying less of our currency right now, and interest rates essentially will go up. We're going to have a major crisis come, and it's going to be mixed in. We will back off. The Soviet system collapsed for economic.
Okay, Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, and I agree with him on that too about the interest rates will go up. He's the one person that believes they still will go up. But maybe not that much. Christopher Green just says it'll go up a little bit, but nothing crazy. But the market, I think, will take it as crazy because we already see institutions raising interest rates. So, yeah. But the same old war rhetoric, but coming from more of a nationalist, fascist type person, I think is what you will see out of Trump. And I think the war rhetoric will play along with that. Okay. Now I'm going to move along here. I have a couple here about Oath Keepers. And they have shown up in Ferguson once again. They were previously there guarding businesses when the first Ferguson riots broke out. And, we've seen a lot of BS come out about them being no racial group or something because they were white. When you see from the first riots, they're hugging black business owners because they protected their business, and some of the businesses that they protected also had apartments above them, and they stopped those from being caught on fire and saving people's lives, and businesses and livelihoods. Well, I have one here. This one's out of reason.com. An Oath Keeper in Ferguson denounces abusive policing. This week, several armed members of the Oath Keepers, a controversial group of current and former military, police, and public safety officials who have pledged not to obey unconstitutional orders, showed up at the protests against police violence in Ferguson, Missouri. They are there to protect two reporters from the conspiracy-chasing website InfoWars. They do not appear to have any plans broader than that. During the city's riots last year, members of the organization stationed themselves on rooftops with rifles and fire extinguishers, announcing they intended to protect local businesses. Several fragments of footage have been floating around the internet since the group returned this week, including one memorial video in which an Oath Keeper announces his belief that Donald Trump will get rid of these people who violate our rights if he's elected. There's also a Vine that supposedly shows the Oath Keeper telling suspicious protesters, "We got your back," though I've got to confess I can't make out anything anyone's saying in it. But the most interesting clip I've seen this week is one initially it seems to be a shouting match between an Oath Keeper and a guy who doesn't like the group. But at the 1:43 mark, it turns into a explicit statement from the Oath Keeper about police violence. Here's a transcript. Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy in Cleveland, Ohio, was shot by a cop who never should have had a badge. That's the truth. He had an airsoft gun in his hand. Man on the streets of New York was choked out for not paying his cigarette tax. I ask you a question. Since when is the penalty for not paying his cigarette tax death penalty in the United States of America? Okay, since when? You want to talk about killing black people? I'll talk about it. What about the guy in Cleveland that was in a Walmart holding a pellet rifle, not bothering a single soul, and a policeman runs in and shoots him dead? Who else do we need to talk about? How many more before we come together and stop this chicken SH Bull SH, and come together as people and say, enough is enough, enough of this violence. How many times? How many times has this got to happen? They kill a white veteran in North Carolina, broke into his home and shot him. They killed a white mental health patient in New Albuquerque, shot him in the back, and the officers on film of his sergeant's car saying, I'm going to shoot that guy the first chance I get, and it's going to on and on and on. John Belmar, the St. Louis County police chief, has described the group's presence in Ferguson as both unnecessary and inflammatory. And they want to try to get him out of there. Now, the thing about them being there to protect InfoWars reporters has been denounced by the InfoWars group. And the original posters of that information were coming out of mainstream media, which since pulled those posts. So this one out of Reason.com has not been fixed. They were there before the InfoWars reporters got there, and InfoWars reporters were looking for the Oath Keepers to interview them. So all the mainstream websites that first reported that, when you try to go to a link anymore, it just says that the page is not found or does not exist. Then we have another one here out of Personal Liberty, which also still had not fixed theirs. But it says here, protesters in Ferguson, Missouri are getting a lesson on the Constitution, a document most of them seem completely unaware of. The lesson is coming from members of the Oath Keepers organization who showed up in the city Tuesday donning protective vests with handguns holstered on their belts and carrying those rifles with 30-round magazines that so frighten leftist gun grabbers, bedwetters, and social Marxist collectivist elites. Missouri is an open carry state. According to media reports, the Oath Keepers were confronted by protesters asking if they were allowed to open carry weapons. I'm happy that we're able to defend ourselves. One unidentified Oath Keeper replied, it's been our right for a long time. Actually, given the self-defense is a natural right, it has always been there, and both the U.S. Constitution and the Missouri State Constitution provide protections designed to remind government functionaries of its presence. Unfortunately, St. Louis County Police Chief John Belmar is apparently unfamiliar with the concept as well as the constitutions of the United States and Missouri. Commenting to a reporter from the laughably incompetent state propaganda media Reuters news agency, Belmar condemned the Oath Keepers' presence and vowed to work with prosecutors to see if the men had broken any laws. The men were there to protect a journalist from the Infowars.com website who was in Ferguson covering the rioters, which is again false. Who were making mischief on the anniversary of Michael Brown's death, according to one of the men who identified himself to media as John. But Alex Jones of Infowars said the website had not asked Oath Keepers for protection. During the height of protests, in the wake of the grand jury's decision not to indict Officer Darren Wilson Brown's death, Oath Keepers protected a number of stores from leaders, providing a service the local police were either unable or unwilling to perform. If you are unfamiliar with the Oath Keepers, is a group of current and former military, law enforcement, and first responders who have vowed to uphold their oaths to the Constitution and oppose all constitutional encroachments. They declare that they will not obey unconstitutional orders such as orders to disarm the American people, to conduct warrantless searches, or detain Americans as enemy combatants in violation of their ancient right to jury trial. Of course, media reports on the Oath Keepers' presence were not without information from the anti-freedom, anti-constitutional governance organization, the Southern Poverty. They have Southern Presbyterian or Preposterous Lie Center, but Southern Poverty Law Center, which called Oath Keepers a fiercely anti-government, militaristic group because, as we all know, standing for the Constitution is fiercely anti-government in the minds of statist progressives. As a reminder, and for St. Louis County Police Chief Belmars and the county prosecutors' edification, the Second Amendment reads, as well, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And the Missouri State Constitution, Article 1, Section 23, that the right of every citizen to keep and bear arms, ammunition, and accessories typical to the normal function of such arms in defense of his home, person, family, and property, or when lawfully summoned in aid of civil power, shall not be questioned. The rights guaranteed by this section shall be unalienable. Any restriction on these rights shall be subject to strict scrutiny, and the state of Missouri shall be obligated to uphold these rights and shall under no circumstances decline to protect against their infringement. Nothing in this section shall be construed to prevent the General Assembly from enacting general laws which limit the rights of convicted violent felons or those adjudicated by a court to be a danger to self or others as a result of mental disorder or mental infirmity. And you can check that one out at personalliberty.com. I'm going to take any calls for the next 15 minutes. If you want to call in about anything that I've talked about this evening, feel free. 718, let me make sure I get the number right, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. Feel free to call in. Okay. Now, I'm going to move to a recent one. Give me a second as it loads really slow. Okay, this one has to deal with guns. Of course, it's from the West Coast. Seattle City Council unanimously approves gun violence tax on firearms and ammo. And you can find this at truthandmedia.com. The Seattle Council voted unanimously on Monday to levy what lawmakers are calling a gun violence tax on ammunition and firearm sales. Seattle, Washington lawmakers also approved a bill that would penalize individuals who fail to report lost or stolen firearms with up to a $500 fine. Seattle Mayor Ed Murray reportedly supports both bills. According to the Seattle Times, the measure, which was introduced by City Council President Tim Burgess, I don't know, would apply a $25 tax on firearm sale, a 5 cents per round tax on most types of ammunition, and a 2 cent per round tax on ammunition at or below .22 caliber. Seattle Mayor Ed Murray said in a statement on the tax proposal, the unanimous council vote on this ordinance demonstrates the commitment of this city and this community to lead on the ongoing national epidemic of gun violence, while action at the federal level and in many other jurisdictions remains gridlocked. We are moving ahead to address an issue so damaging to the young people of Seattle, especially young people of color. Okay, I'm wondering what this money is going to be used for. Is it going to be used to teach gun safety? Is it going to be used to teach that, you kill someone or you're killed, you don't come back from that? That should always be last resort, only defending yourself. Como TV notes that city officials estimate the tax will bring in between $300,000 to $500,000, which would be spent on gun safety and gun violence prevention programs. Okay. Now, I think that you could get donations by a lot of law-abiding gun owners to do that. I don't think you need to tax them. However, Washington state law bans municipalities from regulating firearms, and gun rights groups are expecting to sue to block the legislation. A Seattle law banning guns in parks was overturned in 2010 after pro-gun organizations filed suit. Seattle City Attorney Pete Holmes has argued that the tax is authorized under the city's taxing authority. Second Amendment Foundation co-founder Alan Gottlieb called the proposal dead on arrival and said the courts aren't going to buy it. This is not authorized by state law, and therefore it's not going to hold up. Some gun shop owners believe the tax is a covert attempt at driving them out of the city. Sergei Solyanik, who owns the Seattle area gun shop Precise Shooter, said, "I would have almost no margins, so I'd pass the tax on to my customers, and most people would simply not buy from me. They would go to any of the stores around Seattle. There are a large number, and I would have to close." He also pointed out the fact that guns and ammunition would still be available tax-free just outside of the city, and that tax officials' tax revenue estimates are not factoring in the possibility that buyers will shift their purchases away from stores within city limits to evade the tax. City Council President Tim Burgess said that he has been inundated with emails about the proposal. The reaction has been mixed. We're getting a ton of emails arriving from outside Seattle and across the country in opposition, but we're getting emails of support as well, he said. Now, we know that they've been trying to do this at the federal level, but they know they can't get it passed. So what do? They always go to the local level and do it in the areas that they know they can get it passed. And we see this over and over. And we see this with the United Nations when it comes to, things like Agenda 21. We can't get that passed at the national level. We'll just focus our efforts at local levels and definitely at the cities, and then expanding within that county, and then going beyond there, which they're already done with the cities in a lot of cases, in test cases, and they're pushing through the counties, trying to connect town to town, and then making these large areas of just, it's nature, therefore you're human, you can't go. Or the only way you can go, you have to run on this path, and you're not to come off the path and mess with nature. Oh, your house is close to a wetland or a nature preserve. You can't modify your property. Mow your grass, and that's it. They're doing it already. They're doing it with the taxing of guns too. Now, some people think it's not going to hold up, but look what they did with Obamacare. It's a tax. Well, yep, it's a tax. You can do it. Just change the wording into tax, and you're allowed to do it. It seems to go that way. So I wouldn't be surprised if it holds up, and it will kill in-city businesses. They don't know what they're doing when it comes to that because their ideology doesn't work in practice. But what they'll do is just make criminals out of people because, well, that's what they're really good at. Socialists and fascists. Don't go along with what we're doing, whether it makes sense or not. Screw it, you're a criminal. Okay. I have one here out of Truth and Media from Derek Burrows. Upcoming trial may reveal Saudi financing of 9/11 terrorists. A former investigator with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, former attorney with the Justice Department, will likely testify soon about their role in the 9/11 Commission and information related to Saudi financing of the terrorists. Former FBI investigator Michael Jacobson and former Justice Department attorney Dana Lessman both investigated leads connecting Saudi royalty to the attacks. While working with the 9/11 Commission, they also uncovered evidence linking terrorist activity and the Saudi embassy in Washington and Saudi consulate in LA. The New York Post reported during a July 30th court hearing, lawyers for 9/11 victim families and insurers revealed that the staffers' most serious allegations against Saudis were stricken from the final draft on the 9/11 Commission report as well. They were removed at the 11th hour by the senior staff plaintiffs' attorney Sean Carter of Cozen O'Connor said, explaining that the decision was a political matter. Carter said the staff investigators felt they had documented a direct link between the Saudi government and the September 11th plot based on the explosive material that they had uncovered concerning the activities of Fahad al-Thamiri and Omar al-Bayami. The lawsuit claims that two of the Saudi hijackers were funded through the Saudi embassy and consulate via Thumari, who was working as a Saudi religious cleric and diplomat in LA, and Bayami, who was working for the Saudi Arabian Civil Aviation Authority in San Diego. The Post reports that the judge will decide whether or not to dismiss the case based on Saudi immunity or let the lawsuit from the 9/11 victims' families continue. The decision should come within 60 to 90 days. In early April, Truth and Media reported that Saudi Arabia asked a New York City judge to reject another lawsuit from the families of 9/11 victims' lawyers representing Saudi Arabia filed papers in Manhattan federal court claiming that no evidence exists linking the nation to the attacks. The family members of the 9/11 victims point to testimony from so-called 20th hijacker Zakaris Mazoui. Lawyers representing the Saudi kingdom called Mazoui's comments colorful but immaterial hearsay statements. He was found to be a paranoid schizophrenic by a psychologist testifying in his trial. In late March, the Federal Bureau of Investigation released a report that attempts to discredit a previous report that hinted at connections between Saudi families and Pasadena, Florida, and 9/11 hijackers. FBI 9/11 Review Commission told Congress that a 2002 report from the FBI was poorly written and wholly unsubstantiated. An agent with the Bureau originally found that the Saudi family left in a hurry 2 weeks before 9/11, leaving behind cars, furniture, clothes, and other items. The information was revealed in a 2010 Freedom of Information Act request, which found that an unidentified family member was a student at the same flight school that two of the accused 9/11 hijackers attended. The FBI 9/11 Review Commission largely ignored any evidence of Saudi involvement. The New York Post notes the review panel highlighted one local FBI report generated from the investigation that said Abdulaziz and Anab Haji, the prominent Saudi couple who fled their home, had many connections to individuals associated with the terrorist attacks on 9/11. That is the only latest attempt to hold the Saudi royalty accountable. A previous lawsuit from the families was rejected when a judge found that Saudi Arabia was protected because of sovereign immunity. The decision was reversed by a federal appeals court, and the families continue their fight. Despite the denials from Saudi officials, former Secretary Bob Graham said he is convinced the Saudi government funded at least some of the terrorists who carried out the September 11th attacks. Graham is a former co-chairman of the Joint Congressional Inquiry into the attacks. He recently told the New York Times that he was not giving up his pursuit of finding out who was funding the 9/11 attacks. So that really could even just pit our fight in Afghanistan against bin Laden all to hell. I just seen one pop up here. And this one, exclusive Oath Keepers reportedly attacked by law enforcement and rioters. As previously reported by Truth to Media in an exclusive interview with Stuart Rhodes, Oath Keepers helped the Ferguson businesses from the arsonists and looters ransacking Ferguson, Missouri last November. Oath Keepers are back in Ferguson, and their presence has gained worldwide attention. Oath Keepers is an organization focused on defending the Constitution. It includes former police officers, ex-military. Members of Oath Keepers kept guard for 4 Ferguson businesses last year at the permission of the business owners. Truth to Media's Joshua Cook spoke with Oath Keepers member Sam Andrews to dispel the myths about why Oath Keepers are in Ferguson. Andrews also shared with Cook troubling experiences regarding what is really happening between protesters, Oath Keepers, and law enforcement entities, which has been ignored by the mainstream media. Media is trying to portray Oath Keepers as a racist, all-white group. This is not true, according to Andrews, which we know that if you've followed any of Oath Keepers. We have people from all different races on our security team. We're not racist, and we wouldn't tolerate anyone in our organization who is a racist. If we found out that someone was a racist, we would kick them out of our organization. So that should dispel myth number 1, said Andrews. The second myth is that the police are doing the right thing. The truth of the matter is, Chief John Belmar of St. Louis County Police have been breaking our state law, threatening to disarm people and violating people's rights. They've been breaking Missouri's revised statute 44.101. I would encourage everyone to look up for themselves. It prevents the police or any government official from disarming anyone during a state of emergency. Yet Belmar continues to threaten to do that and continues to try to intimidate anyone who is armed, said Andrews. The third myth is that we are out here in Ferguson to hurt people, and that's the opposite of the truth. We are here to protect people. We've been guarding African American people, Asian people, white people, people in mixed marriages, Korean people, Chinese people. It's just ridiculous that the media continues to try to put forth this lie that we are racist and white supremacists. That's not true at all, said Andrews. We are a cross-section of America. We're made up of people of all races, all political persuasions, said Andrews. Andrews went on to explain how he'd been told by various law enforcement agents, including highway patrolmen, sergeant, lieutenants, captains, and the Department of Justice gave direct orders to police officers to not arrest arsonists and looters. While suspects of committing violence have avoided arrest, according to Andrews, innocent protesters have been attacked as well as oath keepers and journalists. They fired rubber bullets, tear gas, made threats to disarm us, tried to arrest us, gave us an illegal order to disperse when no one's breaking the law. They have broken so many laws with the Department of Justice directives, said Andrews. Andrews told Cook that St. Louis Post-Dispatch journalist was attacked, beaten, and taken to the hospital Sunday evening. That's why we agreed to offer help, said Andrews. Many journalists had no protection, according to Andrews, and those keepers assisted despite death threats from radical organizations as well as threats of arrest and disarmament by St. Louis County Police. So they're out there protecting the protesters and a lot of the journalists out there. So maybe they were helping InfoWars reporters along with the other journalists. Andrews said the presence of the Oath Keepers has been well received by the area community. However, Andrews explained that response from the Highway Patrol and St. Louis County Police to the presence of Oath Keepers has been negative, and he said that they had lied to the protesters by spreading false claims that the Oath Keepers were members of the KKK. Andrews told Cook that the Oath Keepers received several death threats throughout Tuesday. Cook asked Andrews what he would say to the protesters in Ferguson. First thing I would say is Black Lives Matter. The second thing I would say is that the Oath Keepers are here to protect your rights. We care about you regardless of all the lies that the media and some other instigators have tried to propagate. Black Lives Matter. We care about you, we love you, and we're here to protect you, said Andrews. We love the people of Ferguson, and they deserve to be protected, and St. Louis County Police are not doing the job. And you can hear the whole interview there. Okay. We see America socially declining. We see America financially declining. We see a breakdown of families. We see a breakdown of society. We see a breakdown of our economy. We see a breakdown of our security. And all this has been done on the premise that if you give up some of your freedom to government, they can protect you. They'll do what's right. If you give up some of your freedom to a organization, any organization, that they'll help you out. Give up your money, give up your freedom. Well, there's something that our founding fathers had that was a little bit 180 of that. And I don't know if many people really think about it too often. I don't think it really resonates with people because I don't think there's a lot of people that have reached that area yet. And I don't know if we're there societally yet, but I think we are very fastly approaching this. And it's whether technology will imprison us first or it'll get to that point where people start realizing what's happening. And I think a lot of these protests, some of them are, a lot of it is done to incite violence and break down a society. But there's been instances with our founding fathers. And you see this with the real emotional groups with the Ferguson riots and a lot of the other groups that aren't being steered, basically. The ones that are getting kind of mixed into the group of the rioters and arsonists and the ones that are actually harming people and that community, those aren't the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people that, are really just, we want police brutality to stop. We want freedom. We want to be able to interact without being treated as a criminal. And that goes across races right now. And something our founding fathers understood at a point was when it gets to the point where you're willing to sacrifice your fortune and your life for what you know is right, there is a justification in that. And it's not saying that, oh, I think fascism right, socialism right. It's the understanding that the boot that is sitting on top of your head, crushing you down to the ground, needs to be removed. That the ability for society to be free will spark more creativism and it really invokes a soul in a country or a society. There was something about the creation of America that people overlook because you want to look at, the Native Americans and all this. Well, you got to understand, not everybody was involved in that. And there was times after that where it was more about, hey, we can move out west and we don't have to deal with government. The same thing that inspired the revolution. We need to fight off this foreign government. Well, moving out west meant that the U.S. government was more foreign. Well, we've kind of rounded the globe, you can say. We can't run west anymore. We can't run east anymore. Where do we go from here is based on what society is to believe. Do you believe freedom? Or do you believe that asking the boot on your head to crush the guy next to you harder is going to crush you any less harder? Okay, we're at the end of the broadcast. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll catch you this Friday. Stay tuned here on UCY.tv for all the great broadcasts after this.